John Gottman is a psychologist who conducted several studies examining the difference between distressed and satisfied couples. He found that there were 4 specific behaviors that captured much of the difference between satisfied and distressed couples. Gottman called them the 4 Horsemen, sort of tongue-in-cheek after the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, because if they are not corrected, they tend to predict endings. These 4 behaviors are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. Fortunately, each of the 4 horsemen has a corresponding antidote, or the thing that you do instead of the horseman behavior. The antidotes are correlated with increased relationship satisfaction. I found the 4 horsemen framework to be very useful in my work with couples, and over time discovered that it's also very helpful for almost any pairing of people, such as parents, children, employee, supervisor, subordinate, or friend to friend. Let's talk about the first horseman, criticism. Criticism is when you explain to the other person how they need to improve as a human being, what's wrong with them, or what they did or did not do right, and so on. It usually takes the form of a you statement. A you statement usually begins with the word you, followed by the critique. For example, you know what your problem is? You always this, you never that. Usually the criticizer feels very justified and self-righteous in their criticism. After all, they're trying to help the other party to be a better human being. While there might be some truth to the complaint, criticisms usually omit or distort certain things. Criticisms are often voiced unkindly in a way that is unnecessary or not useful to the person receiving them. Sometimes people don't realize they're being critical. They might claim, "I'm just saying how I feel," as if that makes everything okay. A common mistake is to convince myself I'm using an I statement, but when I say, "I feel you always this, you never that," the sentence starts with the word I, but the communication itself is critical. Even if I use a kind and measured tone of voice, but the heart of what I'm saying is critical, I will probably experience a negative reaction from the other party. So, what do we do instead of criticism? Well, we want to express a need. We want to first understand that a criticism is a poorly expressed need. The other party usually responds to the criticism instead of the underlying need. It's like putting a present inside a prickly box. The reaction is to the box, not the contents. I may be hurt or disappointed that my gift was rejected when the other person is really rejecting the packaging. This is how criticisms often lead to my needs getting lost in the shuffle. Expressing a need is usually more fruitful than expressing a feeling. All someone can do with a feeling is to try to empathize. There's nothing wrong with empathy, but it's limited. Expressing a need connects us to the outside world and provides something that the other person can perhaps relate to. I'm not self-contained. I'm interdependent with the world outside me, and to be happy and well, I need things from that world. When you feel a negative emotion, the balance of your well-being is disturbed. For example, if you don't feel content because you're thirsty, you believe a drink of water will restore you to contentment. This basic idea is true for other emotional needs. If you can define what would restore you to a content state in terms that are doable and observable, you'll be making a good expression of a need. It's useful to practice translating feelings into needs. People often voice their needs in overly abstract terms, such as, "I need you to respect me more. I need more love and affection. I need more help." These type of abstract phrases might generate a picture in the other person's mind that's different than the one in your mind. So ask yourself, if the other person were to meet this need, what would that look like? And then express your need in doable and observable terms. The second horseman is defensiveness. Usually when people receive criticism, they respond by becoming defensive or arguing the merits of the criticism. While the criticism might be technically true, the other party will assert that they had righteous motives, or the complaint is exaggerated, or leaves out something very important. Defensiveness communicates to the other party, what you just said has no merit. Now, if we go back to the criticizer's point of view, they're thinking, wait a minute, I don't say things that have no merit. It's probably because you don't understand. So let me repeat myself. Let me give you more examples of your shortcomings, or say it louder. We all know things are truer if they're said louder. The person on defense may then attack with criticism of their own, eliciting defensiveness in their conversational partner. This back and forth can continue until emotions get stronger. This escalation then leads to the third horseman, which we'll talk about in a minute. So instead of defensiveness, we want to find the merit, then find the need. It has two parts here. Both are important. If the other party is criticizing you, they are trying to express a need, but just doing it poorly. The object is to find the need. To get there, we first need to find the merit in the criticism. Finding the merit in the criticism does not mean that you agree with the criticizer entirely and wholeheartedly. It comes from understanding that complaints are often exaggerated, they may leave out important aspects of the problem, and they're sometimes self-serving or unfair. However, there's usually a kernel of truth in the criticism. By merely acknowledging the truth of that kernel, you open up the door to finding the need. So don't get sidetracked and debate the merits of the criticism. That merely gives the horseman more energy. If there is truth into the criticism, it's wise to accept it and adjust your actions. If the criticism has no truth, then there's no reason to become defensive. When considering the merits of the criticism, remember this important question. Do you want to be right or happy? If you want to be right, by all means, argue the merits until you win. Just be advised, this will probably be at the expense of your happiness and the other party's happiness. After you acknowledge the merit of the criticism, ask the other party what they need. What would help them to be happy and well? What do you need at this present moment? And what would that look like if I were to meet that need? The third horseman is contempt. Contempt is a feeling of general hostility or disgust towards the other party. We see them in globally negative terms. Sometimes we can disagree with someone and still feel love and affection towards them. With contempt, there is a loss of perspective and of love. One forgets the good qualities of the other party and the good motives they have most of the time. Contempt can be expressed subtly, such as rolling your eyes or communicating disrespect, or more directly, such as shouting or name-calling. When all of the horsemen are galloping around, it often leads to elevated emotional arousal. When this arousal becomes high enough, it causes what's called flooding. Flooding is when one experiences a deluge of stress chemicals along with accompanying negative emotions of either anxiety or anger. This flooding then leads to the fourth horseman. So, instead of contempt, keep perspective. The hostility and disgust of the third horseman, contempt, often derives from a loss of perspective. When we think of the other party in globally negative terms, we lose sight of important things. What do I love and respect about them when I'm not upset or angry? can I call those aspects forward now? Why was this person at one time my friend? Am I personalizing this exchange and ignoring other factors influencing the other party? Keeping perspective requires us to practice mindfulness and see our reactions in context. Another way to keep perspective is to assume neutral motives for the other party. We often get drawn into contempt when we attribute hostile intentions to others. For example, they forgot to pick up the item we asked them to, and we believe that they did it intentionally. We all make mistakes. We forget things. However, we usually have neutral motives. Try to keep your assumption when you're interacting with others. It's hard to think of positive things when we feel anxious, angry, or upset. So prepare in advance. When you're calm, create a short list of what you love and respect about the other person. Then mentally rehearse this until you can bring those aspects instantly to mind if suddenly put on the spot. This will help you keep things in mind under the stress of disagreement. The final horseman is called stonewalling. Stonewalling is when one party shuts down and withdraws from the conversation. They might physically withdraw by leaving the room or mentally withdraw by no longer really taking part in the conversation. The silent treatment is a good example of stonewalling. About 80% of the time, it's men who stonewall. Men tend to experience conflict as more unpleasant in a visceral sense, and usually things will be chilly for a few hours or sometimes days, and then one party or the other will do something to break the ice. They then return to interacting normally. However, because what was being discussed was not resolved, it lies dormant as an open item, likely to be drawn into the next disagreement. This can become a vicious cycle, where a conversation about anything quickly escalates into a conversation about all unresolved open items. So, instead of stonewalling, we want to pause, repair, and restart. Remember that stonewalling results from being flooded with negative emotions. Nobody does anything well when flooded. The first thing to do is to calm down a few notches. This might take a few seconds, a few hours, or a good night's sleep. It should not take longer than 24 hours. If it does, you might have another problem that must be addressed. Once you are calmer, then make repair. Now, this is important. Repair differs from saying you're sorry. Saying you're sorry often addresses the content of the disagreement. Repair addresses how we had the conversation. Repair might sound like this. You know that conversation we had this morning? I didn't like the way that went. I think my part in this was I got pretty defensive when you were bringing up the issue. I also raised my voice, which probably wasn't helpful. That's it. Just consider 2 or 3 ways in which you may have contributed to the conversation being a lousy one, and then own them. It's that simple. It's also powerful. Repair keeps a lousy conversation from contaminating the following conversations. After making repair, you can attempt to restart the conversation without restarting the argument. If we take a break, calm down, and then try to restart the conversation without first making repair, there's a good chance we'll again fall into an argument. Exchanges that end in stonewalling remain like dry kindling waiting to be reignited. So, the 4 horsemen and their antidotes. The antidotes for criticism: express a need. For defensiveness, find the merit, then find the need. For contempt, keep perspective. And for flooding, pause, repair, and restart. So, what does the conversation look like if we get the horseman out of the way? Well, If the first party is doing the antidote to criticism, they're going to voice a need instead of a criticism. If the second party is not getting defensive, they're going to be curious about what the first party needs. So the conversation is basically a back and forth about needs. What do you need to be happy and well in this situation? This is what I need to be happy and well in this situation. If you were to meet my need, this is sort of what it would look like if you were to meet that need. What is it that you need? What would it look like if I were to meet that need? Now, the last part is, what are your ideas about how we can blend our needs together? I like the word blend more than compromise. Compromise implies a split in the difference and meeting in the middle. And it's not always a bad thing, but sometimes it can not be the best solution. When we're blending our needs together, we're trying to find harmony. I may not get all of my needs met 100%, but I want most of my most important needs met most of the time. And if I'm approaching your needs in the same way, we have harmony. So try to keep the horsemen out of the mix, have a back and forth conversation about needs, and see if conflict is not that difficult of a thing to manage. Now, have a great rest of the day.